It's about the cheese. It's about the pico. It's about the pickled vegetables, onions to jalapenos. It's really a group effort. Certainly there are wonderful nachos where you get some pulled pork on there, or chicken, or what have you, but oftentimes it's not the star of the show.
Hello! Welcome to The Corner Table, a Capital Times podcast about food and drink in Madison. Something happens late on a Tuesday night when tortilla chips and melted cheese and chili spice come together to make crispy, cheesy magic. We are declaring this Nacho Week on The Corner Table. My colleague Erik Lorenzsonn is here to talk about barbecue nachos, vegetarian nachos, nachos with pickled onions, nachos in steel pans, and why layering is an essential skill in his perfect plate of cheese on chips. I am your host, Cap Times food writer Lindsay Christians, and this episode has been a long time coming. Preheat the broiler, it is nacho time! Welcome, Erik.
Hey, how's it going? Thank
Great.
you so much for having me, Lindsay.
This is an episode that has been a long time in coming.
It really has been. I think from day one of this little enterprise we call The Corner Table, I have been whispering from across my cubicle, Lindsay, nachos. I love nachos.
Nachos.
If you ever need someone to talk about nachos, I can do that.
Why are nachos the perfect food? Why are you so glad that the world created nachos?
I have really loved nachos ever since college, where there was a barbecue joint near Vassar College in Poughkeepsie that I would go to all the time, where they had just an incredible plate of nachos. And I think I fell in love with nachos there and have been in love with them ever since for a couple of reasons.
At a barbecue place?
It was like a Southwestern barbecue joint.
Oh.
Yeah. It was called Billy Bob's BBQ or Billy Bob's Barbecue.
Of course it was.
And it was founded by a guy who graduated from the Culinary Institute of America, which is in town. I will say, well, one thing that was kind of specific to the time is I was going through a vegetarian phase. Nachos are a dish where components that aren't meat really shine. It's about the cheese. It's about the pico. It's about the pickled vegetables, onions to jalapenos. It's really a group effort. And a lot of the time, certainly there are wonderful nachos where you get some pulled pork on there, or chicken, or what have you, but oftentimes it's not the star of the show.
They don't need it.
They don't need it at all. I was thinking about this the other day. I suppose nachos really like a protein, so beans for sure, beans for days, all about it. So I think meat definitely serves a purpose in the sense that it does provide that, it serves that role, but yeah, not essential by any means.
So when I think about nachos, the nachos that I grew up with were single serving, so one chip topped with whatever topping you chose, so beans or chicken or beef, usually ground beef, heavily seasoned, and then the cheese on the top that was melted into a perfect triangle on top of the chip. I thought it was Velveeta, but I looked it up in preparation for this chat, and it's apparently a blend of American and Monterey Jack. It melts like Velveeta, so it's kind of greasy.
Yeah, it's got that sweat to it.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yeah, but you would order 6 nachos or 12 nachos, and
I am delighted by this idea. Ever since you described these bespoke nachos, each nacho is its own little serving. That's so great.
It's like ordering oysters, except you're ordering nachos. But I don't see this other places in the country that I have lived, and I wonder if it's maybe a Northwest Ohio, Tex-Mexican-American thing.
Yeah.
I think about nachos sort of like you might think of a burrito or, a sandwich, that idea of bite consistency versus bite variety. I like bite variety, so those kinds of individual nachos are not as interesting to me as your pile of chips with a bunch of toppings and you're nacho cheese and everything.
I absolutely agree. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think there is maybe a sweet spot because, it can be a sad experience when you get a plate of nachos and there are a lot of chips that are just chips,
By themselves.
Exactly. And maybe suddenly, whoa, that chip has like every single ingredient on it. There's just a real disparity of toppings here. What's going on? That's a bummer.
Definitely happens at the Great Dane.
Yeah, but I mean, I do really love that variety as well. Variety needs to be a part of it because there is a little bit of joy when you do get that mother load of a nacho that is, all the elements that you want and is just heaping. And nachos are such a great social food too because so many people, when you get to play nachos with a group of people, if it's a good plate especially, everyone goes like a little bit dumb for a second. It's just like, oh my gosh, gotta get into this plate of nachos. It's so wonderful.
So let's talk about chips.
Okay, yeah.
So the challenge with a nacho chip, right, is that it has to be sturdy enough not to break under all of those toppings, but it has to be thin enough so that it doesn't dominate, right? Like it has to be crispy.
Yeah.
I had nachos last night, and the plate of nachos that I had, the chips had gone soggy, I think because they were assembled too soon. And that's a challenge, right?
I have not cracked the chip code in terms of what is the perfect chip to use. I'll be honest there. But I absolutely have found that there is an ideal sort of sturdiness to chips. We're talking about architecture here to an extent when we're talking about nachos. We're talking about a need for a chip to withstand a little bit of moisture because we're talking about cremas, quesos, tomatoes. We're talking about chips that do need to be load-bearing. Mm-hmm. I actually am sheepish to admit I haven't figured out what the best chip is. So.
We recently had some interesting riffs on nachos that did not use chips. And I thought that like one of them was definitely nachos. The second one was like close enough that I would give it a nacho pass. And the third one, which used actually naan, like fried naan chips, just felt like nachos.
Get it?
Yeah. So those were from Patrick DePula at Salvatore's in Sun Prairie, and he was making them at Lucille for this Chef Week event. And it kind of felt like to me like a smushed up sandwich or something, like something else, but not nachos. The ones with the plantain chips, the nachos jerk from Evan Daniels, the chef at Lucille and Merchant, those to me felt like I would get, because the plantains were crispy. But you're more of a chip purist.
I'm a chip purist.
Yeah.
It's all about you gotta have just your traditional chip and you gotta have cheese. Those are my two defining traits for nachos. It's gotta be a chip. And a plantain chip, that's not the chip I'm talking about. That's not that traditional corn chip that I like, that I need for a dish to be nachos.
So here's my question then. You mentioned cheese. Can the cheese be, when I do them at home, I am broiling them, so I'm like making all this melted cheese. But you have feelings about cheese sauce. What kind of cheese? Can it be a crumbled cheese? Can it be feta? Can it be queso fresco?
Yeah, and here we're sort of straying away a little bit from what defines nachos, what is nacho, versus what I tend to value and enjoy when it comes to nachos. I think that, you know what, yeah, you can have any cheese really be on a chip, and in my mind that's good enough to call it a nacho. That said, I do generally favor a blend of shredded cheese that you melt in the oven, and also a queso that you make that you can pour over. I feel like part of that is I just like the kind of the textural variety there. You get the nice ooey gooey stringy cheese when you lift that nacho away from the plate or the pan. That's so delightful. But it's also nice to have, that sort of consistent baseline queso there that's that I feel like, especially if you're layering your nachos, you can really sort of generously put that on your layers, and you're guaranteed to get that cheesy goodness throughout your nachos too.
Do you still make your nachos primarily vegetarian, or do you put meat on
I
them?
do. Once in a while, I do maybe, toss some pork or chicken into a crock pot while I'm working on other stuff in the kitchen, like if I'm making nachos for friends, and a lot of the time, yeah, I do not. I forego the meat.
So the weird nacho that we had the other night that I did really like and I thought was technically a nacho
Yes.
had wonton chips. This is from Chef Dave over at Notchbeal. And he put a red braised meatball on there, which had nice spice to it. But I feel like I almost didn't eat the meatball because he had that Rangoon cheese.
Yeah, that was interesting. There was a little bit of assembly required there. You had to scoot the meatball onto the wonton chip and,
And there
get
were
a little
pea
bit of
shoots on
that.
it, I think.
Yeah.
It's funny because one of my favorite places to get nachos in Madison is Lucille because they do those sheet pan ones.
Yes. Can we talk about Lucille nachos? Lucille, in my opinion, they changed the game. What a difference that form makes, that the vessel makes. And it's so, balefully obvious, really. You got a plate of nachos, you can't really build right up to the edge of the thing because, it's going to spill all over. With Lucille's nachos, because it's a pan, that's no longer an issue. It is right to the edge. You have 100% consistently layered nachos.
And they're crispy, crunchy because because of the hot pan.
Absolutely. One thing that I do think is essential to nachos is kind of a spirit of generosity, I guess. You really can't skimp on nachos. You really do have to mound those toppings on. And with Lucille, they got mozzarella, pico de gallo, cilantro, sour cream, pork shoulder, pickled jalapenos, and pickled red onions.
I love those.
Those, oh my gosh, acidity in nachos, so clutch, so wonderful. It's kind of weird. It can actually really, that little bit of zing adds a lot to
It
a
really
nacho.
does. It balances out what is essentially like crispy carbs and cheese.
Yeah.
Are there places in town where you love the nachos?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, well, like I said, Lucille. I think, prior to Lucille opening, the place that I really gravitated toward was Vintage Brewing out on Whitney Way. They definitely are exemplary in terms of treating nachos as a vehicle of generosity, of having that abundance of toppings, and also they have sweetness to them in a way that I've never really encountered in nachos before, and that's between the barbecue sauce that they use for their nachos, and they also have a chipotle peach salsa that they put on their nachos. And also, in terms of just a value play, it's $11.50 for just possibly the biggest plate of nachos you're ever going to see. I also go to Rancho, which is a Mexican restaurant on Park Street here in town. They're kind of known for taking the Chipotle model of serving up your food, where you start at the beginning of you start at the counter by saying, I want a burrito, or I want a burrito bowl, or I want tacos, name the format or genre of food, and then you go down a line sort of dictating what toppings you want. So it's really kind of a build your own experience, but the individual parts that they let you use to build that whole, there are some incredible things. They have a delightful queso. They have pickled onions as well, but these are spicy pickled onions.
How do you do with, are you taking it to go then? Or are you taking a box of nachos essentially?
You can. You're playing a bit of a dangerous game, I think, when you begin doing nachos to go, because time is a factor. When you're talking about nachos, if they sit and they settle, you can only ask so much of the chip. It's not going to stay crisp for forever. Generally, it's a sit-down thing. It's just a nice break from work because we at the Cap Times here are just like a couple blocks away from them. So, I mean, the cheese is going to congeal if it's the melted, shredded stuff. I mean, I'll eat it. Don't get me wrong. It's still good. But you don't feel as great about it as when it's like fresh from the oven, stringy, melty deliciousness.
If you are building your favorite nachos,
yes,
from the ground up, just build them. Just start.
Oh, man. Okay. So it is chips, a layer of queso on top of the chips, then apply your sort of vegetables, your pico de gallo, olives if you want to play that game. I don't always. Your jalapenos, onions, etc., etc. And then on top of that, you melt cheese. At that point, it's almost like a lasagna. You kind of wash, rinse, and repeat. And at the very top, you add in an extra generous dollop of queso and a little mound of sour cream, guac, and there you go. Sometimes I make a crema too, but yeah.
Those are the perfect nachos?
To me, those are the perfect nachos. I have experimented with other things, like I've tried out, just melting like, blue cheese with like buffalo sauce and trying like, I don't know, my attempts at like Korean beef and stuff and kimchi. Those are great nachos. But no, what about you? How would you assemble your perfect nacho?
I'm going to start with the donkey chips on the bottom. Usually I like to do like red peppers, poblanos, like onions that I've sautéed, so cooked vegetables. And I like to have them with a little bit of spice blend on them, a little bit of chili powder, a little bit of cumin, salt and pepper, sometimes garlic if I've got it around, whatever. I just throw whatever I feel like.
That's so cool.
And
I don't think about my spice game too much when I'm building nachos. That's interesting.
But usually that layer is like veggies, so onions, peppers, whatever else I've got around. Usually soft veggies, so not like carrots and broccoli and stuff. But and then on top of that, I like to use a cheese that is fairly strong, so like an aged cheddar, and I will grate that over the top fairly generously. I like to have some chips that have stuff and some chips that do not, so I will have like just cheese chips on the outside. So I do my shredded cheddar, like again, generous with it, and then I put that whole thing into the broiler, and it broils for like 3-4 minutes, and then I pull it out and I put on avocado, like fresh avocado. I put on cherry tomatoes usually that have been like cut in half. I don't like them cooked too much, so I like to have like the fresh tomatoes on the top. I usually will put another layer of like ancho chili or like just a little bit of like chili spice blend on top there, and I will, if I've got cilantro goes on. I don't stock sour cream in my house, so I usually will have Greek yogurt that I have seasoned with lime juice, and so like a lime Greek yogurt that'll kind of be on the top.
I think a tangy dairy is just a great dippable no matter what, even if it's not sour cream.
Yeah,
it's
I will
great.
often have the sour, like whatever my sour cream substitute is, like my Greek yogurt or whatever, on the side. So I don't even like put it on the nachos. I just have it per nacho.
I go big, talking about layers. Big 9 by 16-inch pan. Whereas yours, it sounds like it's not quite as much of a production. It's sort of just like, yep.
It is definitely not.
Yeah.
It is Tuesday night, 10:30 p.m., and I have to be up for another couple of hours because I'm writing. So I want to end this podcast with one of my favorite jokes of all time.
Oh, no.
What do you call cheese that's not yours?
If I know the punchline, it's nacho cheese. It's nacho cheese, Lindsay.
Yay!
Is this what you want?
This is what I want. Thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. No, thank you for having me on. This was great. This is a dream come true.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. This has been The Corner Table, a podcast about food and drink in Madison, produced by the Capital Times. Our music was composed by Patrick Christians. For more on some of the nachos we've talked about today, visit captimes.com. You can subscribe to The Corner Table wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Facebook at Corner Table Podcast. I am your host, Cap Times food writer Lindsay Christians. My wish for you this week is super obvious. I want you all to have some nachos, whether you're out with friends or just home on a weeknight. Here's to cheese on chips. Cheers!